Hello and welcome to the editorial analysis of The Hindu. Today we shall be discussing the editorial of the 24th of April. So coming to the first article, the permanence of Arab uprising. Now the context here is with regards to the Arab Spring 2.0. This is what is being believed to be a continuation of the Arab Spring that took place in the year 2010. So this is something that is important, and this is primarily because of protests that have hit Sudan as well as Algeria. So this is what is reminding us of another form of Arab Spring arising in all the Arabian countries. This is one thing that becomes important. Now coming to the issues that have been discussed in the editorial and that are relevant for us. The first issue is with regards to the protest in Sudan as well as in Algeria. Now these are protests where the youth is expressing its anger towards the regimes in Sudan as well as in Algeria. Now about these regimes, you should know the names of the leaders. In Algeria, the ruler's name was Abdel Aziz Bouteflika, and he was the ruler of Algeria for the past 20 years. Similarly, in Sudan, the name of the ruler was Omar al-Bashir, and he ruled Sudan for 30 years. So this is the tenure for which these rulers were ruling, and so as a result of which they were largely dictators, and this dictatorial rule is something that has now come to an end in both these countries. Next, what you need to know here is about the Arab Spring 1.0. Now, as I mentioned, this was what had started in the year 2010. Largely, they started in the late 2010, and this is what first initiated in Tunisia. Later, it later spread to Egypt, then to Yemen, then to Libya, then to Bahrain, and then to Syria. So the Arab Spring 1.0 was a very major event. It was believed that a lot is what is going to change in the Arabian countries during this Arab Spring. But this was something not very successful, and that is what brings us to the third issue that is important here. That is the tragedy of the movement. Now the tragedy of this movement was that this was not successful in all the countries except for Tunisia. Tunisia is the only country where this entire spring, this movement had started, and in Tunisia only a democratic government, a multi-party democratic government is what exists today. Whereas in all the other countries, for example, in the case of Egypt, this was what was replaced by military rule in Egypt. Then in Yemen also crisis is what is going on till today. Libya also is undergoing anarchy, is facing anarchy till today. Also in Syria, the unrest is what is still there. The war in Syria is what has continued for so many years after this uprising in Syria. So this is what is known as the tragedy of the movement. The Arab Spring 1.0 cannot be called as a success because success has not come, or regime changes is what has not come in all the countries. Rather, a replacement of the old regime, rather the non-democratic regimes are what have come in majority of the country, and that is why it is being called as a tragedy. Also, what you should know here are the causes for the Arab Spring. Now, you should know these are the causes for the Arab Spring 1.0, but because this is what has become important in the backdrop of the Arab Spring 2.0, so these causes are what you should have an idea about. The primary cause was the economic model that was based on patronage, because as I told you, these leaders were there for a very, very long term, and as a result of which there was a lot of patronage that was there in these countries, and as a result of which the economic models were not very much people-centric, and that was one reason for the uprising. Next, there was the anger in youth, primarily because of the rising unemployment in all these countries. Also, this was a pan-Arab anger. What is important here is that it was something that was felt across the countries, and as a result of which, when the occasion came, when unrest in one country came, it was rather like a house of cards is what the entire Arab world collapsed at that point of time. It is what had a domino effect on various other countries. So these were the causes for Arab Spring 1.0. But what is important here is that these are the causes which are also being seen for the Arab Spring 2.0. The same causes, that is economic model which is weak, there is anger in the youth, there is unemployment, there is rising inflation. One cause that was unique to the Arab Spring 1.0, because if a comparison is what is to be drawn between the two, so you should have an idea about this. The Arab Spring in the year 2014, what happened was that the prices of oil is what starkly fell. And as a result of this, what happened is that in these particular countries, the oil prices being the only source of revenue is what impacted the economy of these countries, and as a result of which these countries further had economic weakening, and inflation in these countries further rose. which led to the unrest that has happened now in both Sudan as well as in Algeria. So this is the newer reason which has resulted in the Arab Spring 2.0. So this is what you should know as a difference between the two Arab Springs. Next, what is important is geopolitics. Now, what we are seeing here, even in the case of Arab Spring 1.0 and now also in the case of Arab Spring 2.0, the role of foreign countries is somehow important in the Arab Spring, because the matter what is not recluse to the country itself. Foreign players are what come into play. For example, in the case of the Arab Spring 1.0, in case of Syria and Libya, we have seen that several foreign actors come and support different leaders in this country, and this is what complicates the matter much more. The Syrian war was somehow a result of this kind of a patronage that was being given by global leaders to different parties. So this is one thing that is happening even in the Arab Spring 2.0, especially in the case of Sudan, where a number of countries are interfering in the internal politics of Sudan, is what you should know. So this is one entire analysis of the Arab uprising. Both Arab Spring 1.0 as well as the Arab Spring 2.0 are what are going to become important. These countries are all important for India, and in the international relation, these countries and these events definitely do have ramifications for India. So from that perspective, you should ensure that you are covering these topics. So that is the relevance of this particular discussion. Coming to the next article, the problem of cherry picking. Now this is another important article, and this is something that is important. The context here is with regards to the data crisis that is being faced by India, and this is what can be a question directly also. Now this has happened primarily because the government itself has claimed that there is an issue of data crisis, that adequate legitimate data is what is not being generated in India, is what has been claimed by the government itself. So some issues are what become important. The first issue is that of holding back of important data. Now the editorial is highlighting that the government in the past has been reluctant on sharing adequate data or bringing about data in public domain. For example, data about unemployment, farmer issues are what have not been brought in light. For example, farmer suicides is what was is the data that was with the government, but it is what has not been released since 2016. Data on unemployment is what has been covered up by the government primarily because of the elections which are imminent in India. So these are some issues that are emerging. Next is the issue of unemployment. Now in this particular case, we have discussed several previous articles also on this, that unemployment is one of the biggest problems that India is facing as of now. And this is something that has increased in the aftermath of demonetization as well as GST, because both demonetization as well as GST largely impacted the unorganized sector, and it is the unorganized sector which employs 94% of the workforce. So it is this particular workforce that was impacted, and there was a lot of unemployment that was created. But for personal benefits, the government has prevented this data being released in public domain. So the NSSO data on unemployment is still to be released, is what has been criticized. Next is the issue of farmer crisis. Now the government had promised that there will be a doubling of farmers' income, but contrary to that, that is what has not happened. Rather, their income is what has fallen, is what has been said in this article. Now, one thing before I explain this article further, I want to tell you all is that what I am observing recently with all Hindu articles is that because elections are what are due, all the articles have a tendency to criticize the ruling party, which is something I feel is at some point of time it is definitely justified also. But when the entire tone of the newspaper becomes one go, then in that point of time you have to observe some caution. You have to be aware that all the articles are coming as a blatant criticism of the ruling party or the government at present. So this is somehow unacceptable also, because at beyond a point of time this distorts the balance in arguments. So please try and avoid such kind of extreme criticism, but please adhere to the facts only and avoid taking the negative that is coming in the newspapers these days. So coming to the farmer crisis, definitely there is a farmer crisis, and the issue here is, the technical aspect of this issue is that why is this data on farmer suicides not being released when farmer suicide is such a major problem in India? So in that context it becomes important. Also the situation, the agricultural distress is such that this is no hidden fact that there is a crisis that agriculture sector is facing and the farmers of India are facing. Next, what has been discussed here is the analysis of data crisis versus GDP. Now this is a personal opinion of the author, and here he is saying that the government itself has said that there is an issue of data crisis, that it does not have adequate data about employment status in India. So the editorial is saying that if the government does not have adequate data on employment, then how is it that the government has adequate data on GDP? Because obviously GDP is something that is created by the income of the people in the country. So if how many people are employed is what is not known, then how is it that the government is claiming that the GDP of India is approximately 7%? So this is one double role that the government is playing, that this is something unacceptable. That on one hand the government says that it does not have data on unemployment, and on the other hand it is chest thumping itself on the issue of high GDP growth of India. So this is one opinion that the author gives, that the government is going to get stuck in its own statements in this particular case. Next is the issue of international agencies. Now the editorial discusses that this statement of GDP growth is what has been reiterated by international bodies like the IMF or the World Bank. But here also the editorial is saying that all these international institutions or international agencies, they take the data that is domestically available rather than their own surveys. So this is why even the data that they are taking is what is government sponsored data. So that is one important thing that you should know. Next, what is important here is the issue of manipulation of data. Now the editorial is discussing that this manipulation of data is something not new, rather it is an old practice which every government is largely guilty of. For example, the data of the inflation related issues, the growth rates, all of that which are presented in the budget, the fiscal deficits, the revenue deficits, all of which are tinkered with is what has been analyzed. And here the editorial is saying that whenever the base year is what is changed, at that point of time, it has time and again been highlighted by experts that the data by the previous governments was what was tinkered with. So this is something that is a curse of Indian economy, and it does exist, it is a reality. Next is the issue of revamping of data collection. Now here the editorial is saying that if the government is claiming that the data that India has is not accurate, then definitely there is a need to revamp the data collection system, and this is a tedious process. For this, committees have to be formed, experts have to be called upon, newer methodology has to be devised, and only then can newer data be collected. And next is the issue of a Pandora's box being opened. Now here the editorial is discussing that if the government has started this practice where it is defined data which is not in its own favor, then this is what is going to open a Pandora's box for future governments also. Because if any time the government feels that any data is not suiting its needs, then the government will clearly say that this data is not accurate. For example, on inflation, if a government has inflation, then at that point of time the government might say that the data which is analyzing or based on which inflation is calculated is flawed. But is this acceptable, or what are the repercussions of this? Definitely this is going to have cascading effects. For example, in the case of inflation only, it is based on this inflation figures that RBI decides its policy. It is based on inflation that dearness allowance is what is calculated. So if we do not know what inflation is, how will we calculate the dearness allowance, and how will RBI make its policy? So definitely this is a major issue, and this is something that is an unhealthy practice, and the government should have not allowed such kind of delegitimizing of India's data. So this is something that is resulting in a data crisis in India. The topic is de novo, it is rare, so a question on this is what you can expect. So that is why it is important also. Now coming to the next article, in an oil slick. Now the context here is with regards to the pressure that USA is imposing on India to cut oil imports from Iran. This is largely a global pressure that USA is applying on all the countries, and India is also impacted by this. So what are the issues that are emerging? The first issue here is of the May 2 deadline. Now here you should know that from November of 2018, US had given India a timeline of an extension was what was given exclusively to India to ensure that there is a zero amount of import of oil from Iran till the 2nd of May. So this deadline is what is emerging, and that in light of this issue is what becomes important. Next, what is important here is the impact that this is going to have. Now, at present, 10% of India's oil is what is imported from Iran, and India is a majorly oil importing country. For India's growth, oil is what is very, very important. So definitely this is going to have an impact on India. Also, India will have to look for alternative markets, and this is what is important. Next is the issue of US sanctions. Now, the US has said that any company that is using oil which has been imported from Iran will be taken out of the SWIFT international banking system of the US, and there will be a freeze on the dollar transactions of that particular company and the US assets of that particular company. So this is how US is bullying the companies to not import from Iran. So this is what you should know. Next, what is important is with regards to the Shah Bahar port. Now India has huge investments in Shah Bahar port. It is an alternative way to trade with Central Asia, and Iran is important for India in that perspective. But US for now has given a waiver in this regard, and India has been allowed to continue with its development of the Shah Bahar port. So this is what you should know, that the work on Shah Bahar port is not going to stop. Next, what is important here is with regards to the UN sanctions. Now here what is important is that India has always had a policy that it would only recognize UN sanctions and not any unilateral sanction by a country. But in this particular case, India is accepting the US sanctions, and despite the fact that there are no such UN sanctions on Iran, I'm sorry. So this is what is important. Next, what you need to know here is about the cost of oil. It is being feared that once imports from Iran are to stop, the cost of oil will go high, and this is what is going to be a major concern for India. You should know that the prices were at the lowest since 2014, and now they're on a rise, and they have reached $70 per barrel of oil. So there is a fear that this might further increase. Next, you should know that Iran has given a threat that it will stop the flow of any oil from the Strait of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz is a very, very strategic location from where majority of the oil from the Arab world is what is transported. But Iran is in control of the Strait of Hormuz, and it is threatening that it will not allow any oil to pass from the Strait of Hormuz. So in that scenario also there is a fear that the prices of oil can rise suddenly. So this is again what is not in the interest of India. Next, what is important are the traditional ties with Iran. Now India has a good bilateral relation with Iran. Iran is allowing India the access to the Shah Bahar port, which will give India alternate passage to Afghanistan as well as to Central Asia. So Iran is very, very important for India, but India is being bullied by US, and India is coming to the pressure of USA in matters of the sanctions that have been imposed by USA on Iran, and that is what is a cause of concern. Definitely this is what is amounting to US bullying. This is a case of USA bullying all the other countries, and this is what has happened after US withdrew from the nuclear deal with Iran. Also, what you should know here is that definitely there is a need being felt for an alternative financial architecture, so that this kind of unilateral bullying by US is not something that needs to be accepted by the other countries. At present, they are compelled to do so because the financial architecture is such that US has a major role to play in this, and US can ban other countries from using this architecture. So countries like China, India, European Union, all these countries have to come together so that collectively they can develop a new financial architecture which is independent of US. And this is what is the biggest takeaway from this particular editorial. This is what is the solution to this kind of a bullying, and that is how you have to represent it. The issue is very, very important. Firstly, India-US bilateral relations, secondly in India-Iran bilateral relation, and overall in the international relations which have ramifications on India. So the topic is important. Coming to the next article, a natural next step. Now the context here is with regards to the India-Australia bilateral relations. Often UPSC has a tendency that there is an element of surprise in UPSC questions, where we might be expecting that questions should be asked on India-Pakistan relations in international relations, primarily because India and Pakistan has been so much in news. At that point of time, UPSC can definitely surprise you by a country which is seemingly not so important for a bilateral relation. So in that context, this topic is important. Now here you need to know that why this is in news is because of the Aussie index exercise. Now first and foremost, that you should know about this Aussie index only. This is what is a joint naval exercise between Australia and India, and this is what has taken place, and as a result of which this article has been written. This was the third edition of this particular naval exercise, and this was one naval exercise where Australia has shown, or Australia has participated with its highest peacetime defense forces at this point of time. So this is something that is important. And also you should know that in the year 2014 there were only 11 exercises that were held between India and Australia, and now this has increased to 38. So this is definitely a reflection of deepening of relations. Next, what you need to know here is with regards to the strategic alignment between these two countries. I'm sorry, there's a misprint. This should be strategic alignment. Now, what is this strategic alignment? This alignment is with regards to the fact that both India as well as Australia are independent democracies. Both are champions of international law. Both have open and inclusive policy on India and Indian as well as Pacific Ocean. So on these factors, both countries are aligned to each other. They have similar ideology. So in that context, definitely there is scope for deeper bilateral relation. Also for the Indian Ocean region, both the countries are important. Both the countries have interest in ensuring freedom of movement in the Indian Ocean. They are working towards doing away with crime in the Indian Ocean, also towards doing away with terrorism and people smuggling, illegal fishing and trafficking in this particular region. So they are both aligned in this respect also. Also what you should know here is with regards to Australia infrastructure financing facilities. These are financing countries in the Pacific Ocean countries as well as in the South Asia. So this is one exercise because of which Australia is again important to the South Asian region. And next, what is important in the bilateral relation is the people-to-people contacts, which is very, very high in the context of education. This is what is there. In the case of tourism, this is what is there. Also in the case of Indian diaspora in Australia is very, very high. Some figures of what have been given in the editorial that 1 out of 50 people in Australia is born in India. So definitely there is a huge people-to-people contact, and this is what is the depth of it. This is what is going to define the depth of the bilateral relation between the two countries. Also there is huge scope for economy between the two countries. There is scope for trade, and Australia has clearly said that it wants India to become one of the highest trade partners. As of now, it is expecting that India should at least be the third highest trade partner for Australia. So this is something that is the ambition vis-a-vis India-Australia relation. This is something that is very, very important. So please be prepared. In this one article itself, your one country is prepared. So that is why such kind of articles become important. So you should have a look out for these kind of editorials. Now coming to the next article, India's perilous obsession with Pakistan. Again, this is one article which is reflecting somehow the Hindutva elements of the ruling party. So those are the parts that you need to exclude. And lastly, a lot of this is what is a repetition of what we have discussed. The entire gist of this article is simply one. The gist is that both India as well as Pakistan have hyper-nationalistic feelings towards each other, and this is what is seen primarily during the election time. What happens is that whenever there are elections in Pakistan, the discourse of the political parties is anti-India, and now India has also taken up a similar tone where the election discourse is what is anti-Pakistan, and this is something that is a self-defeating goal both for India as well as Pakistan. It is not serving a purpose either for both of these countries, and in light of this hyper-nationalism against each other, what these countries are doing is these countries are spending a large amount of money on their defense budget, and as a result of this high spending on defense budget, the civilian purposes are getting a backseat, and this is primarily in the case of Pakistan, which is already a poor country, and rather in competition with a country like India, which is much more bigger than Pakistan itself. Pakistan has further shifted its human development way back, and in the Human Development Index, both India and Pakistan are not performing. Whereas when it comes to military issues, India is the second largest importer of arms. India has the fifth largest military in the world. So all of these issues are what have been discussed. This has also been discussed in the context of the Siachen Glacier, where both the countries are losing money and manpower on a daily basis. So the gist of this article is that both the countries need to do away with this hyper-nationalistic tones and have to shift towards the development of their people, and that is what is in the benefit of both these countries. And this is one point that you can only infuse into your answers as one argument. I doubt if there will be a scope for discussing for presenting this one opinion as a full answer. So that is why I have not discussed this in very much of detail. So that is what we can extract from this particular article, and that's about our discussion today. I thank you all for watching the video.